Yes.
Is the short entry, Manenji.
It is beautiful. But then I am allowed to call you Shoki.
Shoki, yes.
Lovely.
Yes.
To be honest, we already had the pleasure in winter, so it's nice that we see each other face. Yes, and now we can say we have this lovely chair, we have this lovely audience. So, you are, among many things, the author of Scatterlings. I'm not sure, some of you might have come across already if you had the chance to stroll at the book market. It's a turquoise,
Yeah.
what is it pronounced? Turquoise.
Turquoise. Yeah.
You get it right? Yes. I'm gonna work on my articulation, and by next year, these funny colors will be just. Yes, or maybe for your next book you choose a color something like red. That is something that I could pronounce very well in a lot of languages. So, what is Scatterlings about? It is a historical novel about South Africa, the Immorality Act, about a family being taken apart, being victim of politics. And Scatterlings is your debut, and you landed straight away in 2020 the Dineen Debut Fiction Award. So congratulations to this, because we already had a conversation about how prizes and awards open, well, a little bit a way to enter the market easily. So it's actually great that it must be a great feeling, because we just heard of Jennifer how long it took her for Shinto.
Yeah.
So congratulations that it didn't take 10 years. So this is probably very encouraging. And then a judge said about Scatterlings not only that it's a brilliant piece of writing and a story that is very seldom told in South Africa, and it is pioneering in depth of research. And I noticed this as well when I read this, and I was thinking, what is your relationship to history? What is your relationship to dig deep, to research?
Yeah, it was just because I walk into a room, the first thing people notice is that I'm black, I'm female. I start speaking, you realize I'm probably from the Southern Hemisphere, specifically South Africa. And a South African story often, and even in movies and television, not only in literature. You mentioned that, I remember one time I was in Moscow and this guy outside a museum, he was like, "Where are you from? You're like the first black person I've seen in a while." And I said I was from South Africa. He's like, Mandela. So I was like, yes, Mandela. And that's like not a unique experience. Like it happens quite often. You meet people from around the world, and what they know most about South Africa is apartheid. And what they remember most about apartheid is Nelson Mandela. And therefore, Nelson Mandela became, and I think it was more a result of the structure of Western stories and how Western stories are told. There needs to be a hero. And even in Western story structures, there's a hero's journey, quite literally. So there needs to be someone who represents not only the story that's being told, but the people about whom the story is. And that, for us, for the South African people, the heroes became, and I'm not saying, oh, don't celebrate these people, but most of our heroes were men. We speak about Stephen Biko, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Desmond Tutu, all of these people were men. And so, and that you have to, as a human person living on the planet, the story of apartheid cannot have only affected only a certain specific, like 50% of the black population. It affected all black people. So what were the women doing? How were they affected by this, incredibly violent, turbulent time in our history? And so, in going back to history, I wanted to kind of look at what were the women doing. And so, it then became a very specific kind of story I had to tell. Not only did it have to be historical, it also then had to be incredibly and explicitly feminine. And that's why I think 75% of the primary characters are women. But again, it was just me trying to kind of understand also my country's history. And so yeah, the history part is also because, you know, now we have all these women that we kind of see every day, and we kind of understand how they fit into the everyday world and how they fit into shape in South Africa. But the historical women were kind of like something I was personally just, you know, interested in. Sorry, I rambled there.
No, it's perfect actually. When you say that it was from a point of view, a female perspective, I was just wondering, how did you grow up? Did you grow up in a family where they loved telling stories about their female relatives? Like I remember, for instance, my mom tells me a lot of stories about the things my grandmother did. I never had a chance to meet her, but she told me a lot about how she raised her children, how it was important that even the boys could cook so that no woman can deceive them because of food. So
yeah, the strange thing, and even with some of the guys who came in, again, they're not speaking lies because they do come from patriarchal clans and cultures. So the Zulu guys and Xhosa guys, they were talking about that. And for me, that's an incredibly foreign concept, even though we're all South African, because I actually come from one of the few matriarchal tribes. So, and we have the Rain Queen, I don't know if anybody knows her. So we have somebody called the Rain Queen, and we don't even have the word queen in our language. So everybody is Kosi, and Kosi can be a man or a woman. So we don't even have a feminine word for king. So I just kind of, it's one of those things that I maybe took for granted as I was growing up. Only when I was like now trying to write the novel as an older person, I realized, oh no, not everybody is matriarchal. Do you get what I'm saying? So I had to learn that some people are patriarchal. And then it was only with that lens that I was like, oh, then my book, it was natural to me, but at the same time, with the understanding that not everybody is matriarchal, then it was like, had to be just that deliberateness, I know it's not a word, but that deliberateness then had to, it was kind of a very weird space to exist in because I come from a matriarchal society. I was raised by my grandmother, and you know, apartheid touched my family personally in the sense that we were actually actively removed from our ancestral homes, and they still tell stories about that. Funny enough, though, the person who tells those stories is my grandpa. So, so then when I was telling this story, I was like, Grandpa, you have to be a woman in this one. I'm sorry. So yeah.
Oh, great. It's actually, I love this that you are saying that you're coming. Please tell me again, what is the name of your tribe? Because I think for those who are not from South Africa, at least we have heard Zulu, we have heard Xhosa.
Yes.
But we have not heard so many other tribes. So please say this slowly and loud so that.
Okay, so we are the Northern Sotho people. So Lesotho is a country, so the Sotho part of Lesotho, so take that, we are the Northern Sotho people. So we have the same kind of, at some point, us and the Basotho people of Lesotho have the same ancestors, but we splintered off as the Bantu people did in Southern Africa. But yeah, I'm from a Northern Sotho people called the Balobedu. That's who we are. And in the book, it actually does speak about them a little bit. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think like it's a nice opportunity in a sense because sometimes you read it in the book and if they are very cultural different concepts, it's sometimes a bit difficult to grasp with a lot of things that you focus or personally you feel touched. So I like it having you here speaking a little bit about your personal upbringing, your background. It gives the whole thing, after reading it and then now talking to you, another shape, another frame for understanding. So a more part which is more serious, and this is not the first time I've spoken about it today. I already had the chance in another panel. The Immorality Act of 1950. This is something that it's a theme. It's basically your main theme that, yeah. Tell me a bit more about why you choose to portray this and use this as a sort of...
Yeah, okay, so now we also go back to why I chose history and why I chose women specifically. So the Immorality Act was an act in apartheid South Africa wherein white people and black people specifically were not allowed to intermarry, to have children, to have sex, all that kind of stuff, right? And currently, when everybody talks about the Immorality Act, it's mentioned as a petty kind of act, like, oh, apartheid was so frivolous and just so excessive that they came up with all these stupid laws that didn't make any sense. It's seen more as a law that kind of, where apartheid was just being a little extra, like, oh, we're gonna throw in some racism, but just like a cherry on top. But it actually wasn't, because it was meant to correct something. So that's the core of my book. And I've spoken about this before, and like everybody kind of zeroes in on the Immorality Act. But if I try to sprinkle the Natives Land Act of 1913 throughout the book. I don't try to be explicit, and maybe that was just a little bit of a mistake, but because the Natives Land Act is actually the act that I think gives birth to most of the problems we still have in South Africa. Because the Natives Land Act, what it did was that it dispossessed the majority of Black South Africans specifically of their land. And what this then did was that it forced, we had subsistence farming, which you didn't have to work. You could just farm your own land, produce your own food. Like, it was okay to not be in the mines in Johannesburg, to be in the cities doing this type of work, being a domestic worker. So that was not necessary. But the apartheid government needed workers to be in Johannesburg in the mines. But the Black people did not want to be in the mines because the conditions were terrible, there was tuberculosis, there was a whole lot of nonsense happening, right? So you create the Natives Land Act where you strip people of this land, and once you strip them of the land, now they can't grow their own food, they can't survive. It forces them into the cities. But once they now get into the cities, they can now do things like vote. So you strip them of the vote. Once you strip them of the vote, they're like, okay, now what can we do? We can intermarry with white people and then gain the vote through our children and so forth. So now you're like, what can we do? Let's strip them through the right to marry whomever they please. So it wasn't a petty act. And so it was kind of like a moment in the evolution of what leads to apartheid in 1948, which is when it officially starts. But it actually doesn't start in 1948. And I wanted to zero in those moments wherein Black people were starting to be like, wait a minute, something is happening here. It doesn't feel right. And like, so that was why the Immorality Act, because it's so personal, right? So it could allow me to zero in on the personal lives of specific people, because writing about history is so tricky. Because if you try, again, it's a landmark act, right? But if I write around history, I could limit myself in a lot of ways. And then you have to insert all of these historical figures, which was just not creative enough for me. But if I go for like a frivolous act, and it's a personal act also, then I could be just a little more creative. I could imagine these people's lives just a little bit more freely and so forth. So that's how I guess then. So it's really, honestly speaking, starts with the Natives Land Act of 1913. So by the time we get to 1927, it's kind of just evolved a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. More than sense. And I love even the fact that I have the privilege to speak to you about this, that we all get this kind of things, because it makes us understand, first of all, the history a bit more, because we live so far away. The bits and pieces that we hear by chance of apartheid is indeed very, we've heard the word, we know Nelson Mandela, and depending on how much you are interested into it, you know a little bit less or more. So you putting us through, helping us actually to understand how the system, like systematically, we use the word a lot here as well when we talk about racism, how it is structured and so on, but you break it down for us so we can actually understand it much deeper. So thank you first of all for sharing this. Then coming to the relationship between the characters. Basically, you've already kind of introduced how they help you, how they make it more personal. I understand when you said everybody gets into the Immorality Act, and I was thinking, why is that so? Because it's true, it's the most closest when you live here on that hemisphere, so to say. It's the closest thing that you could relate to, because you have marriages with Europeans and Africans as well in this country. So this is the closest that you can relate to. As in, if you are here, you might not ever have property that can have been taken away in that sense, but this is the closest. So Abram and Alyssa, the couple that you choose to carry on the Biblical story. What I find very intriguing is, although you focus on the female part, you have a very specific empathy for the suffering of Abram. How is this? Like, there is one sentence that I would like to read out because it carries the emotion very deeply. Perhaps because he was unsure what else to do, he slipped into memories, into habits once familiar to him. He rested his chin on her head and mumbled promises, protections he could give to both and her children. And foolishly, Abram began to dream of reconciliation. He began to hope. And I don't want to give away too much from the story, but I felt like, obviously, if I come back especially to that sentence, and I know how things go down for him, and I felt like, wow, it's like, it's a simple sentence, but it's so, yeah, you end up feeling for this dude who is the white person, and in a way also carries certain privileges, but then now these privileges are kind of shaken, being taken away.
Yeah, I think, honestly, when I wrote, I didn't think of it in that way. I didn't think of it in terms of, like, sort of empathizing with a white man during a time where it was more difficult to be black. I just thought of it as, honestly speaking, thought of him as just a man and a father. I just saw him first. Abram was the one character. So with Alyssa, I saw her first as a woman and then as a mother. But with Abram, I saw him first as a father and then as a man. And I think once I did that, that allowed me, because then I could draw on familiar things as well. Like, I write from the perspective, in this case, of a white man. I'm not a white man. I can't have lived his life and understand how he would have viewed the world. But I could draw on my experience with my own father, whom I have an incredible relationship with, if I saw him first as a father, because that relationship I can understand. And if I see him first as a father and then as a man, I can see my father apart from myself, for instance. So I can see my father as a man. And once I did that, it became incredibly simple to then translate, to then take that and superimpose it onto a white person. And I think historically when that happens is when people try to get white people to understand black people's stories. They're like, imagine if it was a white person. They're like, oh, now the story makes sense. But for me, it wasn't because I was trying to understand the story, from that perspective. It was simply because I was trying to write from his perspective. So I had to. So I write my novel as a little girl, as an old woman, as a woman, suffering depression. I write as different people, and at some point I had to write as a white man. And so, to get into the skin of a white man, I could get in easier if I was like a black father. And then I was like, oh, but now I'm white. Does that? Yeah.
It makes absolute